Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for the next part of my single turn playthrough of the Battle of the Eastern Solomons in Guadalcanal. Now when I left you all at the end of the last video, we had just finished the sea movement step. So all the task forces had now moved, and we now come to the air movement step, which, as you can imagine, is a hugely important step in the game. As a reminder, the Japanese are side A this turn, which means that the US player is compelled to make their moves first. And again, apologies for the very crowded mixed search board, but my brain, as I said previously, is not that big, so I've crowded everyone in. So when I start as the US, let's all just pretend that aside from the Japanese task forces that we have definitely cited, and those comprise the convoy of soldiers for Guadalcanal and the Ryujo task group, all of the other Japanese task forces are currently invisible. Although, from the scouting of the last turn, the US Navy is vaguely aware that there are at least two surface forces, possibly more, in the vicinity of this area. And although they have not yet sighted them, they also know that the two main Japanese carriers, Shokaku and Zuikaku, are out there somewhere. They have encountered Japanese search planes the previous turn, Val dive bombers and Kate torpedo bombers, so they could only have come from carriers, and they can't all have come from the Ryujo. So old Frank Fletcher is suspicious, let's put it that way. So the US doesn't really have that many options this turn, because two of their airborne assets, the long-range patrol craft, are already shadowing the two sighted Japanese task forces. And they're doing a good job of giving exact information on their composition, what they're up to. I mean, there's a nice juicy target there because the convoy forces literally just hove to off the coast of Guadalcanal. And as an additional gift to the US, it doesn't appear to have any air cover. Wonderful. So the question is, what's the US going to do? Obviously, they want these two patrolling aircraft to keep tabs on the forces they're shadowing, so they're going nowhere. Which means that this turn, the only fresh aircraft that the US is able to deploy are the two Catalinas from Espiritu Santo. Now, in the case of the first one, the choice is very easy. If my camera will focus on the counter, I think it's doing it. Yay, thank you, camera. It has a range of 9 hexes, which is perfect. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's going to be given the mission of going straight over here so that it can relieve the other patrol plane. Now, as this is the first aircraft I'm moving, now's a good time to talk about what exactly happens, other than the obvious, in the air movement step. So in the air movement step, you can move your aircraft in any order you want, up to the limit of their range. And as you go, you can call out search hexes. Now, search planes can do this. Airstrikes can do it as well. And at first, this sounds great because certainly with the search aircraft, there is no limit to the amount of searching you can do. And what I mean by that is you can call out every hex your aircraft passes through, including its point of origin if you want. However, the downside of doing this is as you call out these hexes, if you call out a very high number, it will give your opponent a pretty good inkling as to where your aircraft originated from. And if your starting point is somewhere in the middle of empty ocean, then you've just given him a pretty decent idea as to where your carriers might be. So a usual trick in this game is to launch your aircraft and let them travel maybe 2 or 3 hexes, depending on where you think the enemy is, before you begin calling out search hexes. So the US does want to cause a bit of confusion, even though they know their searching is going to be rather ineffective this turn. So the first aircraft is not actually going to call out any hexes because they know full well that given the initial Japanese deployment zone, there's hardly any chance. I mean, it would be a real surprise if there were any Japanese warships between Espiritu Santo and Guadalcanal. So what this one's going to do is it's going to travel at the limit of its range, 9 hexes, and join the other aircraft there, which is due to land this turn because it's been flipped to its long-range patrol side. So this bird has been up in the air quite a while, and it will need to land at the end of this turn. So this will be its relief to make sure they don't lose touch with the convoy. Now the other one, which is also a Catalina and also with a range of 9, doesn't really have any good options except to try and make a beeline for where they think the Japanese task forces might be. But this turn, it simply does not have the range to reach them. So it gets as far as it can. Might call out a few hexes just to cause the Japanese some confusion and concern. But at the same time, if you don't think you're likely to find an enemy task force, it's not always a good idea to give away the positions of your long-range reconnaissance planes either, because once they're in an area, they can be a nasty surprise if people are not expecting them. But let's say for form's sake, and just to cover any potential gaps, the US aircraft calls out P6, O6 and O5. Now the Japanese player would confirm in each case that there is nothing there and nothing further happens. So the only benefit really is to the Japanese because they know that there's a reconnaissance aircraft. They don't know what type, so it could have originated from anywhere. They only know that it searched those 3 hexes. And that, scarily enough for the US, is the end of their reconnaissance this turn. Now the Japanese are in a bit of an equally parlous position, because all of their long-range reconnaissance assets are over here. And while they do have the range to get to the decisive zone eventually, they're going to take pretty much the whole of this turn just to get into transit. So they're going to do their best. The aircraft from Rabaul, and it's a Betty with a range of 8, is going to just try going, let's see, if I was the Japanese, I would probably want it to go down somewhat north of the slot. Don't really want it to go straight down there because we don't think there are any US planes that way, but we'd be a bit worried about lurkers over here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, like their American opponents, they might, just for completeness, call out K4, L4, M5, and N5. So a decent search swathe, but again, one that'll keep the Americans guessing. And of course, the US player would reply each time, no, nothing is there. Lots of picturesque islands, green mansions or green hell, take your pick. So, no joy from that one. What about the one from Gasmata? Maybe the same sort of route, but maybe down the slot this time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But they're going to be a bit more cautious about their presence, so they're going to keep mum. They know from the progress of the convoy that there are highly unlikely to be any US task forces on their route, so they're just going to stay there. And lastly, we have the 2 big flying boats taking off from Lae. Now, having learned a bit of a lesson, the Japanese are going to try and spread these guys out a bit. So one's going to take a slightly northeastern route and the other's going to go southeast. So first one will go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 11. It's just going to set itself up for a longer sweep next turn. The other one is going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So coming at the slot from the other direction. And then they can do more of a sweep next turn as well. Maybe even join up with that Betty. Now again, because they have a shrewd idea that the US are very unlikely to have any task forces in this area, they're going to content themselves with just calling out the last hex that they enter, which in this case is L6. So they call out L6. The US says, no, just a bunch of islands. So while this may seem rather frustrating, it is useful insofar as it tells the Japanese one important thing, which is where the US is not. So all they're left with now are the 4 float planes that were launched from Chikuma, Tone, and Chitose. Now, one of them is on its patrol side, so it's going to have to come down this turn. And the Japanese are a little bit keen to find at least one US task force because their main carrier strike force has put planes in the air, as indeed have the United States. So just a bit of a reminder, Shokaku and Zuikaku have both got their, have put a strike package up. And equally, the various US forces have got birds up too. Of course, the US have confirmed targets. The Japanese are hoping to have some, but everything depends on what their seaplanes find. So in order to preserve the uncertainty, I've come up with a simple dice roll system, the one I mentioned before, where I roll against the odds, the density of enemy task forces, and also the range of the aircraft involved, to see whether they actually spot anything. So I'll start with this float plane over here. Now, it has absolutely no chance of spotting anything this turn because it's out of range. They only have a range of 3, so it's a bit limited. So he's going to go from his launch point and go 1, 2, 3, which I think is a reasonable move because he's heading in the general direction of the US task forces, and he's going for the last reported position of one of them. But he's going to be careful. He's obviously not going to call out hexes that his task forces occupy because they can search themselves. I have not mentioned that before, but task forces can also search the hexes they are in. So he's going to ignore those. And he is going to just call out hex P4. The US, of course, says nothing there, and also breathes a huge sigh of relief, but also gets a tiny bit worried. Now, these two here do have the Enterprise task group in range, so I'm going to roll for them both. Actually, let's roll for the first one. Oh, no, US luck holds, because he goes 1, 2, 3, just decides to check the southern sector out, calls out 06 to the immediate northeast of Guadalcanal, and the US says nothing. Phew! What about the next one? Well, there's only one gap within his easy range, and that is Task Force 16, so he's going to make a beeline for that hex, which is P5. And unfortunately for the US, Task Force 16 does not have a combat air patrol in place this turn. If they did, under the optional rules, which I am using, the float plane would have had to have made a dice roll to see if it survived brushing up against the combat air patrol. But the Japanese don't see any fighters. They call out Hex P5. They probably would also call out Hex 05 en route. You wouldn't see your US counterpart, the scout plane, but, you know, just for completeness, you'd cover that hex anyway. So the words the US have been dreading and the ones the Japanese have been wanting to hear is that something is there, which is what the US player is compelled to say. So we then get the search results dice roll. In the basic game, reconnaissance aircraft automatically find what they're looking for. In the optional rules, which I prefer, you may or may not sight your quarry. So let's roll off and see what happens. Ooh, the Japanese get a 6 and the US get a 5. Now the search modifiers are +3 because it's a day turn, so the Japanese are up to 9. The aircraft had no more movement factors available, so they get no bonus. And there is no land in that hex, so it's 9 to 5, which means all they have done is exceed the... oops, sorry, not focusing. They have exceeded the US total. So under that, a player can announce a false figure of ships. So you can either announce between half the number of ships you actually have there or double the number of ships you have there. So it's a partial sighting and it's not brilliant. And the Japanese will mark it with one of these to show that they've got some information, but it's not great. The US player, just to mess with the Japanese player's head, announces that, let's see, so 6. So the US player tells the Japanese player that they have 5 ships in the area, which is confusing because it's big enough to be a task force, but given that you have to include each individual destroyer, and there are 6 on some counters, the Japanese player is left wondering whether this is a surface force or a carrier force. Now, the other important thing is when you're doing number of ships from simply exceeding, you don't have to announce types. So the Japanese player only knows that there are 5 ships in that hex. What about the last reconnaissance plane? Now, the Japanese have a choice with this one. They can either direct it to the same hex to try and get better information, or they can send it wandering around and try and find something else. They decide, quite logically, I suppose, they're going to go with what they're a bit more sure of, and rather than have this plane that's a bit low on fuel wander around, they're going to direct it to the hex and get another roll. So let's see what happens. Ooh, okay. So even with modifiers, the Japanese total is... oh, but the aircraft does have additional movement factors. So the Japanese roll is actually 12 to 9. So it's another exceed. The US player decides he's going to have some fun this time, and he tells the Japanese player in response to their second search that there are in fact 20 ships in that hex. Now that causes a fair bit of head scratching, and this is one of the areas where this game really shines. So one patrol plane has told Nagumo that there are 5 ships in the task force. A second patrol plane has just told him that there's 20. And no, rather unhelpfully, they can't give him types. So what the deuce is going on in that hex? But that has brought the search side of it to an end. Now, I've also realized I've made a bit of a mistake. I should have conducted all US air movement before conducting the Japanese searches. So I'm really sorry about that, guys. We'll just pretend I didn't do that, hopefully. So going back to the US in terms of their strike packages, they hadn't cited any new Japanese task forces, so they're still only aware of the Ryujo group, the attack force down there, and of course the convoy force. So they have aircraft in the air from Espiritu Santo, which may be in range of Guadalcanal. Just going to have a look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Unfortunately, it's not for... some of Espiritu Santo's planes can't make it, but the B-17s they launched earlier are in range, so they are definitely going to head for the Japanese convoy force. And that's the only land-based air they're committing. Henderson's aircraft were still frantically refueling from the previous turn. Now, what about the US task forces? Because Saratoga's group, Task Force 11, had put up some torpedo bombers, and Task Force 16 and Task Force 18 had put up planes too. So Task Force 11 has a choice of targets, and they are going to go for the Ryujo group, which is much closer. So their torpedo bombers are going to take a chance and go in. And luckily for them, Ryujo does not have a cap up, so they just go in. What about Enterprise's group? Enterprise, just to be sure, is going to go for the same target. They're going to go after Ryujo, so they're going to send a big strike package into. Now, I'm placing these at an angle that's different, because in the basic rules, all your attacks on a single target are combined, but in the optional rule, attacks from different carriers or different bases arrive in different waves unless you roll identical numbers. I quite like that rule because it's a bit more historically accurate. So the US have sent 2 separate waves of bombers towards one of the groups they've cited. Now, WASP, which is only down here, has a similar choice. She can either go after Ryujo or she can try and make sure of the transports. Now, knowing that B-17s are not the best when it comes to hitting ships, WASP's group decides it's much more worthwhile if they go after the Japanese invasion force. So that's what they're going to do. Also, the range is incredibly easy. It's only 2 hexes for them. So, sorry, I should have done all that before the Japanese did their scouting again, but let's just ignore my little brain failure there. Sorry, guys. So that's the US side taken care of. What about the Japanese? So they have cited a task force, although they don't have a clue what it is. They have no offensive land-based air available this turn, but they do have the powerful airstrike that the carrier strike force, Shokaku and Zuikaku, put together. And they do have a target. So they are going to send their very powerful strike force winging straight towards the unfortunate Enterprise group. And they duly arrive there. So now that has completed the air movement step. I would normally try searching with some of these things, some of the airstrikes, but as they're all heading to targets that are already identified, I think I might not. Also, I did make a random roll for which direction they were coming in, and Enterprise's group decided to go that way, so they missed a chance to overfly the support force. And similarly, the various US strikes in this direction didn't cross anything, so there's no additional searching there. So now we move on to the combat phase, and the battles are carried out in an order determined by side A, so the Japanese. Now they are thinking that only because they want the terrible consequences to become, known to them, they're going to deal with the attack on the convoy first. So I'm just going to move the phone, bear with me, because we are going to go to the battle board. Hope I've left enough room here. So we have our 2 US airstrikes, which I'm going to put to one side for now. And we have the convoy force, which comprises the Japanese armed transports. I'm just going to put them there. And I'm just going to lay out the rest of their escorting warships. And now another optional rule that I follow in this game, because I quite like it, is tactical doctrine. Japanese warships tended to spread out a bit further to allow for independent maneuvers, which is great, but it also weakens the strength of their anti-aircraft screen. So the Japanese ships have to be positioned 2 hexes apart. There we go. Yep, so every Japanese warship has to be positioned 2 hexes apart. And I may have to back out a little bit so you can see the entire formation. One moment. There we go. Oh, come on, camera. Might have to take my word for it that there's flanking destroyers. Hello, Oscar. Now you can see that some of the destroyers have taken a hit from the previous turn's actions. And so now we see which of the 2 US airstrikes arrives first. This would be quite important if the Japanese had a combat air patrol up, but victory disease being what it is, they either cannot spare or cannot be bothered to include the right number of aircraft. So I am just going to roll red dice for the B-17s, black dice for the carrier aircraft to see who is going to arrive first. Okay, so 2 for the carrier aircraft and 8 for the B-17. So the carrier planes get there first. So the next thing we have to do is allocate attacks. Now the anti-aircraft rating is the second number from the right at bottom. And as there are some fighters with the US force, they're going to conduct some strafing. So they're going to strafe the transports just to suppress their AA. And in the meantime, Scouting 7's dive bombers are going to go directly for the transports. And this other half of the Dauntlesses are going to go for the destroyers down here. And lastly, the torpedo planes are also going to focus on the transport. So everyone's been divvied up. So the first thing you get is anti-aircraft fire. Ships can concentrate their AA fire up to 3 hexes away. So what the Japanese are going to do is, perceiving them to be the greatest threat to their mission, the destroyers up there and the light cruiser are going to join their AA fire with the partially suppressed transports, and they're going to target the dive bombers directly overhead. So the way this works is you add up all the AA factors, in this case 4 with all the modifiers, and that is set against the US aircraft defensive rating, which is, where's my pencil gone? Actually, let's get in really close so you can see. So the US aircraft's defensive rating is the 2 over there. So we have a rating of 4 for the Japanese versus 2 for the US. And these are what you add to the dice roll they make, which I'm just going to do now. So the Japanese, got a 7s for a total of 11. And the US got a 5 for a total of 7. Now all that does is exceed rather than double the US total. So the incoming bomber formation takes a hit, which will reduce its attack rating slightly, but not catastrophically. So the only other AA fire will come from these unfortunate destroyers down here, who are trying to bat off the dive bombers coming in at them. Now they get a -1 to their AA total because they are already, damaged. So they roll and add 1, and the US roll and add 2. So the Japanese rolled a 5 and the US rolled an 8. So their dive bombers suffer no damage on the approach. So just to build up the drama a bit, the first US attack that's going to take place is these dive bombers bombing Destroyer Flotilla 17. So their bombing rating, which is the number down here, is 5. And it's matched against the destroyer's defense rating here, which is 2. The D is only for surface combat, so you ignore that for aerial combat. And any other modifiers? No, we're fine. So straight roll off. The US rolls a 2 for a total of 7. The Japanese roll a 10, which is really impressive. So the nimble destroyers evade all the US bombs very impressively. But what about the poor transports? They're in for a bit of a rough time, unfortunately. So I'm going to start with the dive bombers. Their attack strength is reduced to 4 because of the damage they've suffered. And the transport's defense rating is 2. So they'll make their attack roll. Ooh, the US rolled a 10 for a total of 14. And the Japanese rolled a 7 for a total of 9. So that actually could have been a lot worse. So some hits on the transports, but perhaps given the firepower that was being brought to bear, nothing to write home about. And now the torpedo bombers are going to go in, and I'll just move the camera up a little bit. And they have an attack rating of 5. So same again. Both sides have rolled 1. Now this is a bit catastrophic for the Japanese because their rating's already been reduced by the damage, so they get a total of 2. And the Americans get a total of 6. So that triples the Japanese score. Which means that all of the transports are wiped out. That is a disaster. And there is nothing the Japanese can do about it. In other circumstances, the Japanese, if they had the free roll marker, might have been able to demand a re-roll. But the US side is the one with the free roll marker, so they're definitely not going to call for a re-roll of that one. So the poor Japanese transports get absolutely slaughtered. And the first wave of US aircraft, its attacks over, break off in preparation for returning to their carrier. So normally you can leave them on the strategic map when they've finished their raid. I sometimes, if they're in range, just to declutter the map, I sometimes place them next to their parent carrier, slightly offset. If they're not going to see any more action, then it just makes it easier to remember which parent vessel they're supposed to be returning to. And we just have one more bit of pain to inflict on this poor convoy. So the B-17s, of course, are coming in now. And let me just let my camera focus. Now, they don't have much chance of hitting anything, but they're going to have a go anyway. So the first group is going to target the light cruiser, and the second force is going to go after the destroyers that have already had a bit of a rough time. Now, looking up the anti-aircraft strength, let's deal with these guys first. The Japanese destroyer force that's been left alone is going to try and support their flagship. And against high-level bombers, they have a -2 to their anti-aircraft. So the Japanese only add 1 to their roll. The US bombers' defensive rating is a 2. Don't know how well we can see. There we go. So let's see if the Japanese have any luck. They roll a 3 for a total of 4. The US roll a 6, so their anti-aircraft fire is completely ineffective. What about the smaller destroyer force down here? So they have their rating is actually 0 for the purposes of this exercise because they've already taken damage, and they are also, poor things. Sorry, I just need to adjust my tripod a bit. Bad time for this to come over. Sorry, everyone. Equipment failure, bit of turbulence. It's all the flak. Actually, do you know what? I might just abandon this thing. Let me just bail out from the existing camera frame, which is now on its way to the drink, and I'll just do this hydraulically. So where was I? Yes, so between aiming at high-level bombers and the fact they're already damaged, the Japanese get no bonus, and the US get 1 because that's a rather weak bomber force. So we roll off. The Japanese get a 5 and the US get an 8. So unsurprisingly, no B-17s fall out of the sky. But now it's the US bombers' turn, and as you can imagine, high-level bombers do not do well against ships. They get a -5 to their roll. So if we start with him, his attack bonus is only 1, and the Japanese get a +2. So let's see what happens. Yeah, the US roll a 4 and the Japanese roll a 7, so that's not going to happen. And down here, the US bomber gets a -2, so that's even worse. So they get a 4, but the Japanese only rolled a 1, which is a doubling. So impressively, I can only assume those Japanese destroyers had stopped to pick up survivors. US bombs managed to bracket 2 of them and send them to the bottom. So that actually was a very painful experience for the Japanese. And I will put the US bombers in transit here, just to remind me that they're going to head back for Espiritu Santo. Or actually, do you know what? Given how close Henderson Field is, it might make more sense to redirect them to Henderson. So yes, now that their bombing is over, I will redirect them to Henderson Field. So that was the attack on the Japanese convoy force, which did an immense amount of damage. It basically has rendered them irrelevant. And as I'll put their poor remnants back here, the destroyers have hardly suffered, but the fact that they've lost all the troops that they were supposed to be covering is seriously bad news for the Japanese effort, because what can they really do? The only worthwhile thing they might still attempt over the course of this scenario is maybe head back up that way to try and link up with the invasion force. That way they might still achieve something. So there we go. Now, again, I realize this video has become a bit of a lengthy one, so I will break off there. When I carry this on, we have 2 more, hopefully exciting airstrikes to resolve, and then we'll see where the rest of this turn goes after that. Apologies for the slight failure that resulted in me going for free flying rather than relying on the camera stand, but I guess these things happen. But anyway, I do hope you guys have enjoyed this. I've had great fun so far, and I look forward to doing the next one. Thank you, as always, for your company and the comments. I will be responding to those very soon. Great times as always, guys, and very good to see you. And I look forward to catching up with you all in the next video. Take care. Bye.